If you're struggling to heal from a concussion or a brain injury, I want to explain to you the underlying mechanisms and why you're not healing, because I know no one's actually taught you this. My name is Dr. Josh Madsen. I own Infinity Neuromotor Developmental Centers, and I work with kids that have developmental delays, kids that have had traumatic brain injuries. We apply innovative therapies that have a ton of research behind them to address underlying mechanisms, like the underlying mechanisms of concussions that I know no one has actually taught you. And I want to teach you guys this because it's really, really, really important for your healing. So I'm going to show you guys a bunch of research today. I'm going to break down these mechanisms so you guys can really understand them at a high level. I had a kid even just this last week that was supposed to come in for neurodevelopmental care, but he had a massive injury before he came. He got tripped, hit his head. He blacked out for like 10, 15 minutes till the ambulance got there, that's a big injury, number one. He had lost his personality, his energy. He had chronic headaches for those 2 days before I saw him. By the time we got to the third day of care, no more headaches, energy was back, personality was back. He was functioning again like he was prior to the injury. And if we wouldn't have been able to see him and apply a lot of these therapies I'm going to share with you, that wouldn't have happened. I want to break them down because they're really important, not only just for those acute stages, which even better if we can get them in those really early on, but even for chronic cases of concussions that have post-concussion syndrome, these are also the same mechanisms. So let's break it down. Here's the mechanisms. So we get an ionic imbalance in glutamate excitotoxicity, so it becomes toxic to our cells. That mechanical stress causes indiscriminate opening of voltage-gated ion channels, which gives a massive sodium efflux and a calcium influx. Excessive glutamate release overstimulates NMDA receptors, which results in excitotoxicity and sustained depolarization. So then we get hypermetabolism and an ATP crisis, meaning we don't have enough energy to restore appropriate function. So to restore ionic sodium potassium pumps must work overtime, which is a high ATP demand. Well, I just said if we don't have enough blood for the brain, we don't have oxygen, mitochondria can't function well, and therefore we cannot produce enough ATP to keep up. We get neurovascular uncoupling, increasing energy demands, and reduced substrate delivery equals a metabolic crisis. So this is a metabolic crisis that happens in the brain right away. And then fourthly, we get what's called a mitochondrial dysfunction. Elevated intracellular sodium accumulates in the mitochondria. Mitochondria produce reactive oxygen species under stress. Opening the mitochondrial permeability transition pore leads to membrane potential loss, disruption of oxidative phosphorylation, impaired ATP synthesis, and release of pro-apoptotic factors. And I'm going to break all this down why this is all really, really, really important. And I know you may not understand it all right this second, but simply put is the mitochondria get dysregulated, can't produce energy. Oxidative stress and inflammation, reactive oxygen species overwhelm antioxidant defenses. Lipid peroxidase, protein nucleic acid damage, blood-brain barrier gets disrupted. Then our microglia get activated, which is our immune system of our brain gets activated. We release a lot of cytokine release or pro-inflammatory cytokines, and we get chronic neural inflammation, which contributes to the long-term symptoms. So if you had a concussion 6 months ago, 8 months, a year ago, now you're starting to have chronic fatigue, chronic pain syndromes. You're starting to have memory issues. This is this mechanism happening over extended periods of time, and you never got the energy back to your brain for it to heal. So this is really important because there's no one addressing that underlying mechanism unless you learn this and you start to understand what's going on. So if you're not taking care of this underlying mechanism, you're not doing anything to take care of the concussion. And it's only going to get worse over time unless you take care of it. And your brain has an amazing ability to heal and often can heal from a lot of things. But if we don't have these basic resources, it can't do that. And there's therapies out there right now that have a ton of research behind them that have been known to affect all of these mechanisms. So I want to start talking about my first and favorite therapy for any type of brain injury, any type of neurological issue, and it's photobiomodulation. And I'm going to show you guys some research from a guy named Dr. Hamlin. Dr. Hamlin is very, very well known in a lot of different areas. So I want to make sure you guys understand there's just some chiropractor out here talking about laser therapy. Like this is a PhD researcher from Harvard, and he's a principal investigator of Wellman Center for Photobiomedicine. He's associated professor of dermatology at Harvard Medical School. He's affiliate faculty at Harvard MIT Division of Health Science and Technology. He's written over 600 peer-reviewed articles, and he's a chief editor of Photobiomodulation and Photomedicine. Like this is from his papers, it's not from me, but these mechanisms are true. I see them every single day. So what happens is, I'll kind of just explain a little bit. When we use photobiomodulation or low-level light therapy, we're using two different things. We could either use an LED light, like it'd be a specific device, or a laser. Lasers can penetrate a lot deeper, seem to have a much more accurate and beneficial effect than LEDs, but LEDs do work. They're a lot cheaper, so usually in research, they're using LEDs because it's way cheaper to do. But what happens is when we get photobiomodulation, we get more angiogenesis, so we get better proliferation of arteries, and we get better blood flow, simply put. We get decreased edema, we get more lymphatic drainage, and we get increased blood flow and cerebral oxygenation, which again, remember I said we need to have oxygen to produce ATP. We get a decrease in neuron excitotoxicity, which again, that was a mechanism of concussions that we're talking about. We get an anti-inflammatory effect. We get increase of anti-apoptosis. So we get less apoptosis. We save cells. It's neuroprotective. There's more BDNF, which is a neurotropic factor that allows neurons to start to connect. It's like miracle grow for your brain. We get more synaptogenesis, meaning we get more synapse formation. We get neuron progenitor cells. So we get actually cells that help neurons to grow, simply put. So we get all these really, really beneficial effects using photobiomodulation that when you look at the mechanisms of injury, it's all the mechanism of injury. It affects these same mechanisms. So it's a really good therapy for this specific injury and a lot of other stuff too. But what happens is we have what's called our mitochondria. We have our mitochondria, and this is basically think of this as this is the lining of our mitochondria. And we have these different complexes in our mitochondria. What happens is cytochrome C laser therapy affects cytochrome C oxidase. This is the fourth complex of our respiratory chain. So what happens is that as we upregulate that, we get more ATP that gets spit out. And this has been shown over and over and over and over again in all these studies is photobiomodulation increases energy production or ATP production. And again, remember we said that one of the main mechanisms is mitochondrial dysfunction. We lose ATP. If we can get ATP to upregulate, we can start to re-regulate the cell, decrease that inflammation. Now that sodium potassium pump can start working more appropriately. Now those cells can have less damage and the brain can heal more efficiently. And that's exactly what we see. It's also been shown to have a brief increase in reactive oxygen species produced in the mitochondria where they absorb the photons delivered during photobiomodulation. The idea that this burst of ROS may trigger some mitochondrial signaling pathway leading to cytoprotective and antioxidant and anti-apoptotic effects of the cell. This is what's called a hormetic response. So just like exercise, when we go out and exercise, we get a hormetic response. We increase reactive oxygen species, which forces our body to produce its own antioxidants. So as we produce more antioxidants, that actually helps that mitochondria to get rid of these reactive oxygen species and decrease that inflammation. Photodissociation acts as a vasodilator as well as a dilator of lymphatic flow. So we get more vasodilation, meaning we get more blood flow, meaning we get more oxygen, which is very helpful for those cells. We get increased blood flow, greater oxygen availability, oxygen consumption, and improved ATP production and mitochondrial activity, which again is extremely important. Here's a caveat here. You have to have a strong enough laser to get to the brain. So this is the biggest deficit that I see in research is they may not be within a therapeutic dose. So if you look at a research article on an LED light and it goes, oh, well, they did this for a concussion. It didn't show this, positive response or where it may be. When you start doing the math on it, we find out that they weren't even close to a therapeutic dose. So making sure, or maybe they didn't have the right wavelengths in there. So that we know right around in the 800s, 808, 810, 830 penetrates really well. Red can penetrate, but not as much. And if we get a really high, like a 940, we get less penetration. So making sure that they found that 808 nanometer light was the best and could reach the depths of the brain of about 40 to 50 millimeters. So we can get a lot of depth with an 808 nanometer. They found that, and also a lot of the studies being done right now are done in mice. So this is really important, is because you can't give a human a concussion and then go pull pieces of their brain out and see what happened, and then laser them and then pull other pieces of their brain out and see what happened. You can't do that. So a lot of times they're using mouse studies. And then what they do a lot of times is they take this, a mouse has about a 40% transmission of light through their skull. So a very, 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 very high amount. Humans have about 4. Some studies show 2%. And so they take a lot of they have to calculate out the dose needed in a mouse, and then they have to multiply it by at least 10, if not 20, to get the appropriate dosage. And you often don't see that unless they're using laser therapy, which again, lasers are very expensive. So they don't utilize lasers much in research, and therefore they don't get as good of results either. So that's some important breakdowns in how research is done right now in photobiomodulation. Is there's a lot of really, really positive results being done with animal models and really cool changes in tissues in animal models, but there's not a huge amount of studies that have shown a really high, like a really good function in a human, but it's because the dosage is so much lower than what it needs to be to get to that therapeutic dose. So just FYI that when you're reading research on this, make sure that you're getting an appropriate amount. The research is actually utilizing a laser. It's getting the appropriate dose into the brain. So just a caveat there. So number one favorite thing, photobiomodulation. Hugely helpful. I mean, I can tell you over and over and over again, case after case after case, that this has dramatically changed people's lives. The second one I want to talk about is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. What happens with hyperbaric oxygen therapy is, while breathing air at atmospheric pressure, most of the oxygen is bound to hemoglobin. In this situation, blood hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen, approximately 97%, and working at a near maximum capacity with a small amount of oxygen dissolved in the blood plasma compartment. If the percentage of inhaled oxygen or pressure at which oxygen is breathed is increased, more oxygen will dissolve into the blood plasma. In hyperbaric oxygen therapy conditions, the fraction of inspired oxygen and pressure, or partial pressure of oxygen, increases. Supersaturating the blood with oxygen, inhaling 100% oxygen at a 3 atmospheric, increases mean arterial oxygen tension from approximately 100 milligrams to about 2,000, so basically they're getting way, or equivalent to 3 to 60 milliliters of oxygen per liter of blood. They're getting way more oxygen to the system. And that's at 3 atmospheric units, which is way deeper than I would do for a neurological issue. But the point being, our mitochondria need oxygen. When tissues are injured, we don't get enough blood flow and oxygen to those areas for them to heal and for that mitochondria to produce energy. Here's a therapy that's really easy to do that increases oxygen to that system. Now our mitochondria can function better. Now we can produce more energy. Now we can heal more efficiently. Really simple. And there's a lot of cool studies on hyperbaric oxygen therapy, improving concussions, improving cognitive skills, decreasing neural inflammation, helping with synaptogenesis and axon integrity, also increasing parasympathetic nervous system activity, which a lot of people know if they see people that have concussions is they have really big autonomic dysfunctions. A lot of times they're stuck in a fight or flight state. So that's a really important point there that it's very helpful for. Second favorite there. And then I'm gonna jump into this. This is the last thing I'm gonna talk about. This is non-invasive therapies for neurotrauma. And I have a lot of experience with a lot of these. There's a couple that I don't, so I'm not gonna talk about those because I just don't have that experience with it. But the ability to non-invasively target key recovery mechanisms such as enhancing neuroplasticity, reducing inflammation, and attenuating secondary injury cascades offers a transformative therapeutic approach that avoids the risk and complications associated with invasive interventions. A number of non-invasive brain stimulation techniques have been developed, such as transcranial electrical stimulation, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and vagus nerve stimulation. And also ultrasound, which I don't really know, I don't do, and then also photobiomodulation. So I'm not gonna talk about ultrasound, but there's a lot of these other ones I do have a lot of experience with, so I'm gonna talk about those. Transcranial electrical stimulation what it does is there's a cathode and there's an anode. And a cathode, basically what they do is they change the polarity of that sodium and potassium. They either excite sodium potassium influx or they inhibit it. So it's been shown to enhance motor learning, memory consolidation, cognitive tasks by strengthening synaptic efficacy and long-term potentiation. So it's like a very small current that you either increase excitability or you decrease excitability of the neurons. For instance, you could stimulate Broca's area, which is our speech motor area, to facilitate improvements during language tasks. So if you're trying to do speech therapy, you could put a direct current on their Broca's area to increase the excitability of that area of the brain to get more plasticity. While stimulation of the parietal cortex may support learning and visual tasks. A key feature of transcranial direct current is polarity-dependent effects. Anodal stimulation involving the delivery of positive current to the cortex increases neuronal excitability by depolarizing the resting membrane potential. This depolarization brings neurons closer to their activation potential threshold, enhancing their likelihood of firing in response to synaptic input. So simply means it increases the frequency of firing. So for some people, like kids that have developmental delays or maybe attentional issues, their frontal lobes aren't firing efficiently, and therefore they can't create attention. You can use transcranial electrical stimulation to increase that frequency of firing to create more plasticity in that system, which is pretty cool. This is a very important one though for concussions is conversely the cathodal transcranial direct current, which applies a negative current to the cortex, induces hyperpolarization, moving the resting membrane potential further from the action potential. This hyperpolarization diminishes the likelihood of neuronal firing, efficiently dampening cortical activity. This inhibitory cathodal stimulation may involve a reduction in sodium and calcium channel activity, as well as enhanced GABAergic signaling. So it decreases, so like for example, let's say we have a concussion and this mechanism of calcium potassium influxing and exfluxing, this apoptic effect is happening over and over again. You could use a cathodal transcranial direct current to decrease that, to slow that down, and it increases GABA, which calms the brain. And this is important for these people that have epilepsy, because this is the mechanism in a lot of cases of after they have a concussion, they start developing epilepsy, but that's because this whole mechanism we already talked about is happening over and over and over again. Well, if you can decrease that, you can decrease those events. So that's quite important there. A secondary potential mechanism is it releases transmitters. Research using in vitro electrophysiology has demonstrated that an electric field can modify the conductance of voltage-dependent sodium channels within the axon terminals. So basically we can improve that stability, improve neurotransmission. So that's really cool. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, this is using magnets instead of a current to really do the same thing. And a high frequency stimulation greater than 3 Hertz facilitates long-term potentiation. A low frequency, less than 1 Hertz, induces long-term depression. So I'm just going to be very simple here. You can increase activity in the brain or you can decrease activity in the brain. So if you have a super inflamed brain that's way too overactive because of that excitotoxicity, you can use a low frequency to decrease that inflammation, decrease that excitotoxicity. Or if you have someone that's maybe delayed and doesn't have enough activity, you can increase that. So really, some really cool research there. And there's a lot, I'm just showing you one research article here. There's a ton of research on these different modalities and how they work. And I've been reading them for years, but it's really cool. This talks about ultrasound. I don't do much ultrasound. I don't have any recommendation on it just because I've never used it. So I don't want to talk about it. Again, we get back to transcranial photobiomodulation, which I think is the most effective for calming down neural inflammation, improving this whole mechanism very quickly. This is a really important point that I didn't talk about. There's some really cool studies on near-infrared light can stimulate neurogenesis. A dose-dependent effect of laser stimulation on cell proliferation. Administration of low-level laser stimulation for 3 days after CCI-induced injury resulted in an increase in cell proliferation, whereas stimulation 14 days showed a similar level of proliferation in controlled mice. So what they did, they're talking about a study that I've read, and what they did was they induced a concussion, and then they lasered them, and then they looked to see what happened after that. And what they saw is a very neuroprotective effect, but also proliferation of those neurons. So actually new neurons, or neurogenesis, which is super cool. Vagus nerve stimulation is a non-invasive stimulation where we use the peripheral nervous system to help to modulate the central nervous system. It has a really good anti-inflammatory effect, but VNS has been shown promise in improving cognitive function and reducing neuropathology in animal models and brain injuries and stroke. However, specific mechanisms remain to be fully understood. VNS delivered during the early post-injury period and continued for 14 days was also shown to facilitate behavioral recovery with improvements in motor learning and hippocampal dependent spatial memory. It decreased oxidative stress, it decreased inflammation like key markers, NF-kappa B, and inflammatory markers, simply put, and it helped to downregulate pro-inflammatory signaling, which are all really important. I'm really excited to share this video with you guys. I see so many people that are simply told the same thing. Oh, you got a concussion, go home, sleep, rest, which are all obviously you need to rest for your brain to heal, but they're never told about, well, here's about 6 other things that you could do that are known to address the underlying mechanisms of concussions and brain injuries and help you to heal. I've seen these work over and over and over again. I mean, I had one of the first times I saw this happen, it was the most unreal thing I've ever seen. And I had a kid that he was a young adult, came to me. He had fallen off the back of a truck. He had hit his head. He died, came back to life. He was in the hospital. I told him you'd probably never walk, you'd probably never talk, type of thing. Came to me, I don't know, a month later, or basically once he got released, and we started applying a lot of these therapies. And he could, at that point, he was starting to talk a little bit. He could barely walk. He could scream profanities at me because he had no impulse control. But he was able to do some of those things, but he didn't have good function. And we started lasering him. And then he went down to a clinic to do hyperbarics down in New Orleans. And he came back, nicest kid ever, no more profanities, balanced, could walk. It's just because they used hyperbarics to get that neural inflammation down. That's actually what got me interested in getting a hyperbarics. Then what we saw is as we started, he was using hyperbarics at home, he was doing laser therapy at home, and then we started a whole process of neural rehabilitation, working back through primitive reflexes, balance integration, ocular integration, and he ended up graduating from high school, graduated from college, he has a job, he has a home, one of the nicest people I've ever met. And he was told 6 years ago that he may never walk or talk again. That type of thing there is therapies out there that you just have to look up and find that can dramatically improve dysfunction. And I don't want people to not do it because they didn't know about it or they didn't know about the research. And it's extremely important that this gets shared with other people that have had concussions. And, for some people, maybe it doesn't work, but for a lot of people, it does. And if you just share it with them, they can finally have some hope. They can have something to look into. They can have something that maybe they've been struggling for years with post-concussion syndrome and depression and anxiety and OCD. And if they just start doing some of these therapies, their life dramatically changes. Can't tell you how many patients have had concussions and have been suicidal tendencies for years. And we get this inflammation down and get this mechanism addressed, and their life is restored, and now they're able to function again. So if you know someone that could benefit from this, just send it to them.